So behold, the eyes of the monster. I'm sure most of you saw it here. And I'm sure most of you see what I mean when I say these caverns are very well known for very good reason. That is a dramatic view. That is an eye-catching view. Most of you saw that coming around the corner here while you were taking your pictures. And, well, believe me when I say that's visible from a good, I'd say, good 1,000 yards into the valley of the house. Growing so well is because, well, the main ingredient in concrete is limestone. But with all this being limestone, it's a natural concrete. Because it's a natural concrete, when it hardens up, it becomes very structurally sound. And in fact, to put it into perspective, I'm sure one of you was probably going to ask this at one point today, but during an earthquake, you may or may not feel anything. And even if you did, you wouldn't have to worry about breakage. Namely because all the stuff we're seeing around us, this is the stuff that's lasted for about 15 million years. This is the stuff that's structurally sound. This is the stuff that has experienced millions and millions and millions of earthquakes over the time. This stuff's not coming down anytime soon. Now, with that being said, are there any questions before we get going?
So how long before that will drop?
That little,
Yeah.
about 60 years of growth right there from that breaking point. Yeah. Oh, and you watched it drip.
Yeah.
This one, right?
So, with that, we're going to start heading up this way. I'm so sorry for having to paint that image for you guys, but it's a great example of what's going on in here. Because all that carbonated water starts seeping in through the cracks and pores in the rocks at the surface of the mountain. And as it starts traveling through all that limestone, it's breaking apart the calcium in the limestone into a calcite mineral. It's dragging that calcite mineral with it as it starts to drip in through the cracks and pores in the rocks directly above. And as it starts to do that, it's dragging all that calcite mineral drip by drip into the stalactites that hold tight to the ceiling. In fact, you can see that process happening right over here behind me here. This little soda strip of a stalactite here, it's got a little drop of water on it. That drop of water is always there, but it drips several times a day. That's because there's a steady flow of water coming in from above, collecting carbonation, seeping in through the rocks, breaking apart the rocks into a calcite mineral, dragging the calcite to this point right here, and then dripping to the floor below. When it takes a lot more of that calcium with it. And when it drips to the floor below, all that water splashes, it disperses, it seeps in through the soils, but it's leaving behind all of that calcium right where it's dripping. In fact, there's a prime example of this right over here. Over here, you can see where water's been dripping, not quite on a basic level as this stuff, but you can see it's been leaving behind all that calcium into the floor here. Given enough time, all that calcite is going to start to stack. It's going to start to rise. All the stuff being left behind is going to start to grow and get taller and taller from the stalagmites that might grow up and reach a stalactite. And after a few million years after that, you start to get the real interesting stuff like this. There's a little water droplet right there. You can see some of it. Yeah, that's exactly what I was talking about.
So when do we have more?
Yes, actually. Give me a second. Alright, so, excuse me, sorry. Let's take this from the top. If stalactite holds tight to the ceiling, and stalagmite has their operation, what do you suppose we call them when they reach? What do you suppose we call them when they reach?
Columns.
We call them columns. There we go, gold stars. That's our column up there where you can see the two stalactites and stalagmites are reaching one another. Then, of course, beneath that system is this bell canopy right here. Bell canopies are creatively named because they are shaped like a bell and broad like a canopy. And this is where I'll become the first person to let you guys know that cave formations don't always get the most creative names. Watch this. Over here, these formations that look like coral along the rocks here, cave coral. And over here, some of this coral has tubes growing underneath that look like organ pipes, coral pipes. And these names aren't the most creative, but honestly, it's the theories they tell that are the most creative. It's the theories that the stories they tell that are the most fascinating. If the theories that we believe, these two formations in tandem are how much water was in this place at one point. And as water drips in from above, it splashes right around here. The initial splash creates the tops of the coral, all that water dispersing in the mud. And then, in some places where there was a lot of drippage, all that calcium was sinking into the mud. And when it was sinking into the mud, it trapped a layer of mud into a layer of calcite, creating these pipes which are full of an ancient clay from the ancient mud. Another example of how much water this place used to get is actually right over here next. This is a refreshing pool of water. Or at least it was a few million years ago. You can see where the water used to flow in from. It would pool up right here. And, well, this formation right above it is what's called a shelf stone. Essentially, as water drips in from above, it drips into a body of water, and all those minerals scatter across the surface during the rippling process, which, well, if you get enough water pouring into one spot, all that rippling is creating a large shelf that sits at the surface of the body of water. This is a massive shelf, to say the least. That being said, we've got a better example of shell stones later on. I only really bring it up now because, well, this is massive. It takes a lot of calcium. In fact, a lot of this stuff. The stalagmites that come, the bells and torus tubes, the shells, it's all calcium. It's all calcium being broken up from the rocks directly above. So given enough time, what do you suppose is going to happen to the rocks directly above?
Get one more lumber.
Well, I'm heard it in the back actually.
Fall apart.
It's gonna fall apart. All that stuff was breaking up. It's gonna eventually fall apart and come down like it did over there at Jack's entrance. All those rocks and boulders his guests would climb down from, best believe they came from the ceiling. And you gotta be careful because each and every rock up there is poisonous. Yeah, one drop will kill you. Yes, again, I'm so sorry. Just trying to liven up the mood. When you start talking about collapse, people tend to get nervous. They want you to walk and talk a little faster. But there's a beautiful, beautiful silver lining to the desert outside. Bold statements only, the desert is dry. There's not a lot of water anymore. This is how much water this cave was getting at one point. That's how much water this cave gets now. And because of that, well, a lot of this is drying up. And when it dries up, it's starting to harden up. It's not unlike broad, flat, disc-shaped one right here. This is what's referred to as a cave shield. Cave shields, once again, water is under pressure. It's coming in through cracking the rocks up here. When it's coming through here, what's happening is that the water is fanning out. It's kind of like when you put your thumb over a garden hose. And because of this, well, with all those minerals going that way, oftentimes cave shields like this get stalactites growing along the edges. You know, all that water comes back down to the earth eventually. And so they'll oftentimes get completely overcovered in stalactites, or in this one's case, this one had stalactites growing along the edges here until they got so heavy, they snapped off the weaker edge. That being said, well, at the top of the staircase is what has been deemed one of the best cave shields in the United States by geologists. Whoop whoop. That being said, it's perfectly round. It's got no visible breakage or decorative stalactites. It's a completely preserved cave shield specimen, but staircase is a little narrow. And at the top of the staircase is a tunnel that's also kind of narrow. But we're going to be strung along. I won't be able to address each and every one of you at once like I have been so far. So I need your guys' help. As we head up this way, I'm going to show whoever's directly behind me the cave shield. I urge you guys, of course, take your pictures. But when you're done taking your pictures, turn around and show the people behind you so they can take their pictures. And then you guys turn around and show the people behind you. And so on and so forth until everyone has seen the cave shield. And then, as we head down this tunnel, we're going to do the same thing. You see, there's a few stair steps. Be careful, watch your step. And at the bottom of the stair steps, I'm going to shine my light on two things. On one side are 300-million-year-old coral fossils embedded into the rocks. They're intricate and full of little detail, but they're quite easy to walk right past. So be sure to point them out to each other. And it's really important to do so because
that's pretty cool.
What do you say, 30 million, 300 million? Here's the tube.
Yeah. Coral and tube.
Wow. Careful.
Look like coral.
Oh, that's the tube they crawled through? Heck no.
It's not so bad, you just gotta get on your hands and knees and shimmy. I've done one of those, it's fun. It's after like 100 yards when you start having less fun.
Yeah.
We got, everyone down?
Last two here.
Alright. Okay, so.
Come on up. Oh, that's cool.
There's another one that's kind of well known, not quite to the extent of the first one, but Jack, we don't really have much records again of who discovered these and whatnot, but Jack must have known about these at some point because Jack himself would bring friends and family into this one in particular. It was much harder for him to get to, so he didn't bring his guests into it, but you know, special event, you want to bring, you know, a group of friends or somebody you want to impress, you bring them in here. Alright, are you the last one in the group?
Yep.
Wonderful, sweet. So, first, let's talk about those cave mushrooms back there before we do anything in here. I kind of want to talk about them once we all have elbow space here. You see, well, those cave mushrooms were not discovered until state parks put in the man-made tunnel. The start of the tunnel is right here, actually. And, well, when they did discover them, we realized that not only is that little pocket that we see them in, part of a miniature cavern network, but at one point it must have been filled with water. Because that, well, when you go back and look at your pictures, you'll notice that all those cave mushrooms are leveled with each other. That's because at one point, that was how much water was in that pocket. And as water dripped in from above, they splashed into that water pocket right there. And all those minerals scattered across the surface and started to clump together as they formed those mushroom caps to those little mushroom formations, which, well, this sounds eerily familiar. That's because it makes them a lot of little shelf stones, just like the big one in El Paquiva here. Real quick, let me make sure. There we go. So, I want to, well, now let's do introductions. Let me welcome you to the Fallen Stalactite room, a room that gets its name from this gigantic vault. Okay, I guess my flashlight died. This gigantic fallen stalactite right here next to me. This thing fell from the roof of this cavern so many millions of years ago that as water drips in from above and runs down the sides, two things are now happening to him. One, the smaller stalactites at his base are trying to bend right back down towards gravity, while the rest of him is clearly slanted. And two, he's being fused to his surroundings. You can see that here on the ground where he's completely fused into these steps here, but he's also fused into these this rock wall here, where you can see these beautiful drapery formations. It's exactly what I talked about in the previous cavern, but it's a much better example. Water is coming in from a crack in the rocks up there. It's running down this solid rock wall. It's doing what it does best. It's dragging all those minerals with it across this rock wall, forming these stalactites that are more or less embedded into the walls now. And then, of course, well, if I can go back to talking about the fallen stalactite here, this is the room name. He weighs roughly 8.5 tons, according to the best estimates. And, well, that's heavier than an African elephant, just to put into perspective. However, the real elephant in this room, and I'm sure you guys felt it as soon as you walked in, well, it's 73 degrees, 26% humidity. Trust me when I say you guys came on a good day, because it's 27% humidity. You see, essentially, well, what we're feeling here is the fact that this is a north-facing slope. Just like the slope outside, it's a lot more Mojave. It's getting heated up, especially in these back rooms here, because these back rooms are heating up so much. When moisture comes through here, especially during the snowstorms we get at the beginning of the year, all that moisture drips through here, and then it evaporates. It becomes the humidity that we feel, and it gets locked in here over the course of a year. If you were here just last week, it was actually at 37% humidity, and the month before that it was at about 40, and the month before that it was about 50. That's because the humidity really ramps up here, and then it gets locked in as it slowly disperses over the course of a year, and then we get the snowfalls, and it ramps right back up again. This is a great example of that time capsule effect, because the moisture we're feeling are from snowstorms that have passed many years from now. That being said, another example of that time capsule effect is right behind the fallen stalactite here. It's called the wishing stone. You guys are all going to get to go face to face with the wishing stone. In fact, show of hands, does anybody here want to touch at least one of these formations? Yeah. You're not going to want to when I'm done, but thank you for being honest. Essentially, this is the one formation you're allowed to touch. Tour guides of old used to call it the wishing stone. The reason being that they would tell you that you could put your hand on it and make a wish. And the reason for that is because right next to it are a couple of fallen stalactites that are a bit of a tripping hazard. Essentially, you were encouraged to put your hands up on the rock and prop yourself up against it as you stepped over. But it led to a few problems. First of which is that it is a prime example of what the oils of our hands do to these formations. It is smooth, polished, rotten away, and completely corroded out. It looks like worn out leather from an old armchair. I'm sure some of you know what I'm talking about. Of course, it's also a prime... Oh, we got a bat? Yeah. Oh, he must have flown off.
Looks like he's hanging.
Oh, there he is.